Welcome to today's webinar, Don't Sign Yet, what every board should know before starting a major project. Thank you all for joining us. I'm gonna just move the screen along. Give me 1 second here. All right. So my name is Millie Ventura, Business Development Manager for the Palm Beach region here at Castle Group. Joining me today is Miss Audrey Ortiz, EVP of Business Development and Client Relations at Coast to Coast, Alcuz Onate from TRC Worldwide Engineering, VP and Division Director, and Lindsay Thurswell Lur, shareholder at Siegfried Rivera. On the screen, you'll see instructions on how to submit your questions in the chat. Please hold all questions until the end. We will be monitoring the chat and allow time at the end for any questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. Audrey?
Hi, good. Almost said good morning, but good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Millie said, I'm the EVP of Business Development and Client Relations for Coast to Coast General Contractors. We are a full service general contracting company. We've been in business for 40 years, servicing South Florida. We are a privately owned father and son business, and we specialize in concrete restoration, painting, waterproofing, stucco repairs, pocket repairs, everything you can think of on the exterior of your building. We are prepared to make those repairs for you.
Thank you. Alcuz?
Hello, everyone. So good morning, well, good afternoon, yeah. And well, I'm the Miami Division Director of the TRC. TRC is Worldwide Engineer, is a engineer firm nationwide, and we have more than 50 years here in Florida, but recently funded the Miami Division, especially to attend restoration project, which is one of my background here in Miami and Florida, making restoration project for high rises and commercial building. So we are very excited to service to the condominium association and keep working beside the board of directors, so helping to keep the asset in health.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Lindsay Lair from Siegfried Rivera. Siegfried Rivera is a boutique law firm that focuses on real estate litigation, condominium and plan use development law, as well as construction litigation. We consider ourselves a full service community association firm, handling meeting packages, construction contracts, construction litigation, and everything in between, from enforcement matters to day-to-day amendments and meetings. We represent over 650 communities from Palm Beach all the way down to the Keys. And many of our attorneys are board certified in either condominium and plan use development law or construction law. I myself am one of the shareholders at the firm and am board certified in condominium and plan use development law. And I hope that this webinar provides some insightful tips on how to handle very complex construction projects.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, so to get us started, first question, what are some of the first things a board should consider before starting a major construction or restoration project? I'm going to turn this over to the engineer.
So, well, with the first thing is to not think of engineer as a low bid commodity for contractor. So think that the engineer is the beginning of the whole project, because he's the professional responsible on, and he has the accountability about the specification that you need to have clear before call a general contractor for bid. So that's the first thing. Maybe the engineer has some cost that some member of the community unexpect, but the education to the every community to understand that the engineer is the key for future saving and for misunderstanding on during the execution of the project. I think that could help.
Okay, I'm gonna pause for 1 second because I am getting someone saying that there's some feedback. So I'm gonna ask the attendees, is anyone else getting feedback? Yes? Okay. So maybe what I'll do is if you're not speaking as a panelist, mute yourself and then see if that helps. Yeah, no feedback here. Okay, no feedback here. Okay. All right, we'll move along and we'll try muting ourselves when we're not speaking. Lindsay, would you like to chime in on what Alkus was saying?
Yes, of course. I think the first step in any construction project is you need to understand what the scope is going to be and who the professionals are that are going to be advising you, both as to what work needs to be performed and making sure that you have the appropriate agreements in place. Oftentimes, I see construction disputes after a one-page proposal has been signed and it hasn't been vetted and there are problems, and these contracts often aren't looked into because boards sometimes think that not reviewing these proposals is a cost savings. But I will say the cost will meet you at the end of the project. So really important to understand what the scope is, have an engineer advise as to what the scope is, unknown and unforeseeables as well, and make sure that those agreements are being reviewed and you're being protected.
I would like to add to that as well, because it is critical, obviously, to have the right engineer. But beyond that, sometimes the engineer is solely structural, right? Does your scope have mechanical? Do you need a mechanical engineer? Do you need a landscape architect? Understanding the scope and all the other disciplines you may need to pull in to finalize your drawing so that you can get the appropriate permits when we reach that stage.
Okay. And so since we're talking about, starting the project, what is the core reality that every board should understand before embarking on a major restoration project? Audrey?
The reality of, what I say is restoration, right? Construction is very different from new construction, right? So the harsh reality is what we often hear is the unforeseen. When you're in new construction, you know exactly what you're putting in, you know exactly what the conditions are, everything is brand new and very controlled. And an existing building, there's unforeseen conditions, right? We can hope that things are according to plans, that someone somewhere along the 30 years of your building's existence didn't do something they weren't supposed to do, right? And we've opened things up and literally post-tension cables are going, there's more or less than what is dictated in the plans. So those are conditions that you can't anticipate. So understanding there's no way to avoid that. Now there's ways to mitigate it, right? And prepare for it, but there is no way, that's a really harsh reality that, you just have to understand that is going to be something we will encounter in the projects, right? And so in knowing that, the reality is you have to budget for that, right? So even though we know the cost may be this, you need to budget a contingency for when those scenarios arise.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think Audrey made a really great point that because this is not new construction, there are going to be unforeseen variables. And not only does the board need to be aware of these anticipated increased costs and unforeseen work, but it is really important to be transparent with your owners throughout the process of evaluating the work to be done, explaining that once the association exposes concealed areas, additional work and perhaps shoring may need to be implemented, and that these projects, while inconvenient in part, are necessary for the restoration and the well-being of the entire community. So while no one likes to hear that there is work that wasn't anticipated, it is something unanticipated work should be anticipated.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add, it doesn't just drive the cost up, some, but it's going to also increase your timeline, right? And that's another, large impact that so the residents is, okay, well, now we have these unforeseen conditions. Sometimes it extends the life of the project, which means now your community is going to be under construction longer than they hoped for, right? So that is something I think with active communication throughout the life of the project will help, manage these harsh realities.
Yeah.
Okay,
Of
okay.
course.
The experience of the engineer firm or the engineer in restoration project and the experience for the general contractor in restoration project is a key in this case, okay? Because what we have is when the engineer has the experience on the restoration project, we usually record a data, and according to the kind of deficiency and the measure of deficiency that we found on the project and when we perform the assessment, so we know how much concrete defects could be behind the stucco. We can estimate it, not exactly as Audrey said, but we mitigate the extension in the future of the quantities. That's one of the things, and we can detect former what we are seeing, what kind of failure we can find during the execution of the project. If you hire a contractor without experience in restoration, maybe they think that the price of the concrete that they are going to pour is as a new one, and it isn't. There is many activities during the restoration that have to be previously and that are included in the pour of the restoration or in the application of the stucco when they have to replace, that they don't have in the new construction. And it could be a source of a change order asking or requesting by the general contractor because they ignore it when they bid. So that's important to take on account the experience, the previous experience, and the condition. The general contractor has to be dedicated to that.
Well, that leads me to the next question, right? What is the biggest mistake boards make before hiring an engineer?
Okay, well, one of the biggest mistake, as I mentioned at the first, is thinking that it's a low cost service, and it isn't. It could be maybe more than you expect at the beginning, but for sure you will save more money that you will pay for the engineer during the project execution. So as I mentioned before, so try to target the engineer with experience in restoration and forensics, because it's not only the damage that you can see, but the capability of the engineer to look to look behind you are finding on the surface and find the root problem to solve during the restoration.
Lindsay?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. As I mentioned, and I saw one of the comments too, it's really important for both your engineer and your general contractor that you have strong construction contracts that you can enforce. There are oftentimes proposals that are presented with waivers of consequential damages or limitations of liability. The contracts that you sign must be reviewed by an attorney to ensure that you have the appropriate safeguards, the appropriate enforcement rights, the process for change orders. So at every step of the way, the association shouldn't be hiring an engineer unless the contract is reviewed. The association shouldn't be hiring a general contractor unless the contract is reviewed. You need to make sure that these individuals are vetted, that they have experience talk to other associations about using this particular engineer or this particular contractor. Ask your attorneys. These are not small projects, and they're very costly and very important to your community. And it must be vetted and it must be reviewed in detail.
Audrey, you were going to say something?
Same thing, right? Just making sure, South Florida, with everything that happened with the legislation, became a very desirable market, right? It became very opportunistic for, engineers, owners, rep, general contractors. So there was an influx of, and as they should, right? There's an opportunity to create a business, but at the same time, South Florida is unique in their codes, and their environment being a coastal environment. So it's really important to make sure that all your partners, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later on, is well versed, right, in completing a project. Have they completed a 3-year concrete restoration project in your building, right, on time, and let's say within budget. And do they have experience working with the engineer, working with your attorney, right? So those are very critical things to consider when putting your teams together, because it's going to cost you one way or another. So invest your money up front, because it's really going to control the cost for the life of the project.
And that was my next question, Audrey, so I'll let you take it. It's what should boards look for when selecting an engineer, a contractor, an owner's rep, or a project manager?
Oh, great. So let's start with the engineer, right? And the engineer, sometimes, it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do we hire an owner's rep and have them help us hire all the professionals we need? Or do we start with the engineer? I really don't have an opinion either way, because I see value in both, right? Because again, if you're going through this project for the first time, what are you supposed to look for in an engineer, right? So an owner's rep can kind of help you navigate what I mentioned earlier of what disciplines are included, or in the scopes or the work that we believe needs to be done. And let's make sure that we are vetting the engineers, and we know that they've have success in doing projects of this size, and they have they can help you put the engineering team that you need to complete the project, that are going to have, they are familiar with working with the local municipalities and putting together thorough drawings for the city, that they're going to give you a very comprehensive bid form. I'm sure Lindsay will talk about that later on, of how important the thorough documents are and how they play, those are exhibits into your contract that are important. So that's, I think, you start there with your owner's rep and get your engineer. As far as your attorney, right? You can't just hire any attorney, right? You're not going to hire, a family attorney, right? Family law attorney. You need someone that specializes in construction, right? So make sure that, I think sometimes associations may think you have a really great general counsel, but perhaps they don't have someone that specializes in construction. You're allowed to engage another attorney or another firm for those services, right? So just making sure you're hiring the team that has the knowledge in what you're trying to put together. And then as far as your general contractor, again, that they have experience in the South Florida market. There's a lot of questions you can ask as far as, are they using subcontractors? Ask them about their bonding capacity. Ask them if a bond has ever been called on them. It's also important for them to be open to using the association's contract, right? I think general contractors who've been working in South Florida for a very long time understand that the association, what's in the best interest of the association is to use their general counsel's, their attorney's contract, right, that they've created for them. So it's very important to kind of ask
Great
them.
advice. Great advice. Lindsay?
Yes, before hiring an engineer, it's really important to ensure that the engineers are appropriately disciplined. If you need a structural engineer, does the firm also have mechanical engineers? Does the firm have a waterproofing specialist? Does the engineering firm have other disciplines that you may need to consult with and provide recommendations with for your project? So really important to ensure that the engineering firm that you're selecting is appropriate for the needs of the work being engaged. I completely agree with Audrey on project managers. A project manager does not have to have an engineering background. It's certainly helpful, They should have a strong construction background. The project manager is there to serve as a liaison for the board and to help in communications so that management who may not have experience in construction projects isn't bogged down by the day-to-day oversight that's needed to help move these projects forward. So I strongly recommend in large concrete restoration and renovation projects to have a project manager, and that project manager is also vetted. The project manager, again, needs to be someone that you feel comfortable with, both managing the project, who has had experience in these projects, and that you've received recommendations on, that they've handled projects of a similar nature. With respect to selecting a general contractor, typically what we often recommend to our clients is we prepare a construction contract, and as part of that construction contract, a bid form and a bid package prepared by an engineer will be included in the contract. That bid form will set prices for the work as well as unit prices for unanticipated work. That bid form needs to be, or the bid package needs to be bid out to multiple contractors, at least 3, and then the association, along with its engineers, its project managers, or its attorneys, or its management company, needs to run a comparison of those bids, because even though one bid may come in lower, it's the unit price costs that may ultimately drive up the price. It is does the contractor use subcontractors? What is the contract? What is the bond fee? Does the contractor have any bonding capacity? These are all important questions that a board must consider when evaluating which professionals to retain.
And I do want to mention before I have you jump in, Alcuz, this is also why it's important to have a management partner, because with a management company such as Castle, where we have over 600 communities, we've gone through so many projects, right? So you have references. You can reach out to a neighboring community that's used a GC and can say, hey, what was your experience like? Alcuz, did you want to chime in on this?
No, yes. Well, beside the opinion of Audrey and Jennifer, yeah, I would add that the scope of work should be uh, uh, well detailed, okay, well detailed on the bid form. And when you hire an engineer firm or an engineer for the project, so the association should ask to the engineer how detailed will be the bid sheet, because I have an experience. I arrived to a high-rise restoration project on progress, and the association was on the board was a kind of desperate, because they had 3 years paying to the contractor for hourly fee. So time and material is the worst thing that you can hire a project for a long term. Is not recommended. And that building had 3 years with the same contractor and with an engineer firm overseeing the scope, just for time and materials basis. And of course, when are we going to finish this? Is the question for the board member and the association, uh, pushing to the board for how much more money are we going to spend? And that's the question. In that kind of contract, you cannot have the answer how much is remaining to pay. So that's important. The scope of work should be itemizing. You should have or at the maximum item by unit price, and just you can have a lump sum when the contractor or the general contractor has ensured that there is no change order for that item, and it could be a lump sum. More of the cases that I have appreciated for lump sum is the painting, because the general contractor usually can measure on the plans and on site before the bidding process how many square feet has to paint. And in that case, they usually would prefer a lump sum, and that's it, but not with the paint of lump sum. During the execution, it's not feasible that the contractor say, I suppose that it was X square feet and now I found more. No, it's on their responsibility, and they take care of that before the bid process. But as much as we can, we disclose all the items by unit price and square feet, linear feet, or each, if it's countable, the item. So that's the unit that we recommend to use and we use.
Okay. Well, before we get into the planning, because we're going to talk about the bidding process as well, I just want to
Mhm.
have Lindsay define the role of the board, the community manager, the engineer, and the project manager. Specifically, I would say the project manager, right? Because a lot of times boards will say, "Oh, but I have a property manager. That's your project manager, right?" So can you define that role for us, Lindsay?
Yes. So the board of directors, as in any decision that it makes, is the representative of the association who makes decisions for the association. Oftentimes, property managers have a variety of tasks that have no relation to ongoing construction projects. And having your property manager who may not have significant experience in construction or engineering manage a ongoing construction project in addition to their daily duties is both not feasible, and it results in gaps in the project, gaps in the approval process, delays in communications between the contractor, the engineer, and the board. And we certainly, for that reason, recommend that a separate project manager be hired to serve as the liaison between management and the board with the general contractor and the engineer. That allows you to have oversight of the project and answer questions from the board, share information and updates on the project at real time, as well as provide recommendations to the board on enforcement, perhaps construction that's a little bit delayed, or observations on work that may not be in conformance with the plans. So yes, while sometimes associations do not have project managers, if you're not going to have a project manager, you need to make sure that you have the resources and the time on site for a board member or an assistant property manager to assist in those roles, because otherwise the project will most certainly be delayed, approvals will be delayed, and the process overall, perhaps errors will be missed.
Audrey, maybe you can talk about some of the struggles you've had with that, right? Because you're in the front line, right? So I'm sure you've dealt with both having a project manager and then not having one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, it really, I say it depends on the scope of work because, yes, we've worked in both scenarios. So when it's really a straightforward concrete job, right, and painting job, we can really work hand in hand with the engineer, right? Because it's pretty straightforward, and we will support. We have a designated project manager that's assigned to each project who will liaise with your management team on site, and we do all of this reporting to help move things along, right? And we have a working things have to go to the engineer anyways for coordination of inspections and approvals, and we submit RFIs. So it's a natural working relationship. But when there's multiple projects going on, right? So you have your concrete restoration, or there's a lot of coordination and logistics, and you're doing your pool deck and you're doing, your a roof replacement at the same time. That's a whole nother level of coordination, right? So oftentimes I think it's nearly impossible for your manager to be successful, 100% successful managing your property and acting as your owner's rep, right? So, or as your project manager, we often say, as a property manager, your condo, whatever your budget is, $1, $2, $3 million, you're running a $3 million operation. Now you're going to add a $1, $2, $3 million project that's going on. You're asking, it's two different businesses they're essentially running, right? So it can be done, but it's something will suffer along the way, to Lindsay's point.
Yeah, and I will say, if if you do not have a project manager, the project managing services will have to be provided an additional oversight by the engineer. So the
Yeah.
cost for that extra project management and additional oversight and review, which should be performed, may just be paid to the engineer. So it's really a cost analysis, as we said before. If you're not paying for the cost up front, you're going to be paying
It's
for it
like a
on the
cost
back end.
diversion, right? Like, where are we diverting? This work has to get done. Where is it going to get done at, basically?
Yeah, because as wonderful as our contractors are, you do need to have an independent person review and inspect them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we were talking, I know Akuz touched on the planning piece. Akuz, how does a comprehensive engineering assessment before bidding save an association money in the long run?
Mhm. Okay, that's a good question. The assessment that should be done, trying to not spend too much money for the association. So it is in our case, we do not recommend to put or to install swing stages to sound the surfaces and see what happened, because we have several reasons for that, because it's too much cost for the association. And we detail the work in that moment, but between we perform the assessment, we do that on site, spending for swing stages, for personal, technical personnel, sounding all the whole surface of the building. So between that time and the time that you get the general contractor to perform the work is a period that the stucco continue to deteriorate and the new issues could appear. So the best estimate that we recommend to do that is supporting the visual inspection on drone survey, flying the drone for all the surface that we cannot reach, and make a technical or inspection, visiting unit and sounding the stucco and checking the roofing, with on site with specialists on each scope, the roofing, the waterproofing, and the structural engineer go to the property, make a walkthrough, test a random previous established unit that we need to visit, and in that way we have a, good data to process and compare with the data we have record on the office and make the projections. That's the way that you don't have, the association don't have to pay too much for that on when it says, if the specialist during the walkthrough find some point of interest where additional destructive theft should be done before we prepare the bid sheet. We recommend that and we do so, but it's not more common. But we usually, with the visual inspection, is okay, but exceptionally some testing of, could be required.
Can I just add to that? It's actually a great point and sometimes very necessary. We also provide destructive testing, right, to help an engineer evaluate the existing conditions. I recently did one, and it was very beneficial. They assumed that they had major pool deterioration. They just weren't sure how severe it was. But after we did the demolition, we did the lab testing of, we took some core samples of the concrete of the pool. And we also facilitated in kind of giving a budgetary number, right? Like, all right, this is how much is deteriorated. You can do a full pool demolition and rebuild versus trying to repair 70% of your pool, right? And kind of see from a cost analysis what that looks like. That's very valuable information as you're going in, not just for your engineer to understand the conditions, but from a budgeting standpoint for your association.
Audrey, I'm so glad you brought this up. So what are some of the signs that suggest that there may be some hidden structural or building issues beyond what you immediately see?
Well, that is for sure your engineer on the call. Right? Water
No,
intrusion, falling.
no, water intrusion, some kind of cracks that we can find. So there is external signs that we identify, and the engineer are educated for that. Maybe for every crack is the same for people with no education on that
Right.
scope, but the cracks are different and tell different things, and that's our role on the fields to identify that, and based on that we can request additional destructive tests
And you see, like
or perform
delamination.
non-destructive tests that exist too, and these are tools that we have in hands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
the
so,
location of the cracking and the water intrusion, where it is, these are all things that should be pointed out to the engineer so that the engineer can evaluate and determine whether a
Mhm.
whether comprehensive repair is required or if it's more superficial in nature.
Mhm.
Great. I'm going to jump over to contrast and risk management because it's 12, close to 12:40 now. I want to leave some room at the end. So Lindsay, who should prepare or review the construction contracts and at what stage should legal counsel become involved?
Yeah, I would recommend that you get your legal counsel involved at the beginning. Oftentimes, we have board members that are attorneys that love to draft their own contracts. Unless they are construction attorneys, I would recommend that while again, you may try to save money on the front end, it will come to haunt you in the end. These contracts are very complex. They have important terms. I see a lot of questions about termination and non-performance. That's what these contracts are for. They can allow you to terminate for convenience in addition to terminating for cause. They allow you to recover certain types of damages. You can recover liquidated damages for delays in your project. It can provide for requirements of the contractor or the engineer upon termination. Payment terms. One of the questions that we got was, is it typical for a contractor to require 50% of the total cost at signature? No.
that's a red flag.
This is why boards should not be signing those one-page proposals, and complex construction contracts need to be presented from the beginning, and those contracts can be attached to your bid package so that the contractors are aware of the contractual requirements that are going to be made. Insurance is so important in these construction contracts if things go wrong. So I strongly recommend that you spend the money upfront to have a strong construction contract and not wait until the project has failed to ask for help.
So I say, I have a couple of things that I say as it relates to the general contractors and the contract. Now, mind you, I am a licensed CAM, so I'm maybe a little biased in the association world, but good contractors are comfortable with good contracts, right? So it is, again, I can't stress it enough. There typically shouldn't be much pushback from a good general contractor if you're giving them your association attorney's contract. The terms are business terms and they're negotiable and reasonable. Things will go wrong in the project. It just happens. Disputes come up, things arise, boards change, conditions change. So the best way to make sure your project continues to move forward is to have very clear language as to how to resolve a dispute or address something in the contract, right? That is really critical to make sure that your project keeps moving forward at a pace that it's supposed to. The other thing I've often seen as well, when we go back to the vetting contract. So yeah, there was a lot of contracts about messages about, firing an engineer in the middle of a project, firing your GC. If you're doing all the vetting thoroughly in the beginning, you will seldomly find yourself in a place where you're terminating your engineer or your GC in the middle of the project. That's why it's so critical to make sure you're doing what you need to upfront to avoid those scenarios, right? So I think that's really, really important. And you fall in love with a GC and now they can't meet your contract requirements. They don't have the bonding capacity. They don't have the licensing requirements, right? They don't have the manpower to complete it in the day that they indicated they were going to do it. And you awarded them because they were going to do it within a certain time and now they can't do it, right? So There's so many provisions that need to be met in that contract that I personally think you should include it in part of the bidding package for them to review it.
Right.
They
And
start
because
that
you both
all over.
And because both you and Lindsay mentioned the insurance requirements, Lindsay, what insurance requirements, bonds, and other risk protections should every association require before work begins?
Yeah, I mean, you always need general liability insurance from your contractor, workers' comp insurance. Oftentimes, boards are misunderstood, or the insurance is misunderstood by the associations. Insurance does not cover bad work. Insurance covers property damage that is caused by the bad work. The best example that I love to give is the window was installed defectively. Well, insurance is not going to cover the cost to repair the window, but insurance will cover the cost of the damage to the floor that was resulting from the water intrusion from the defective window. So it's really important that the insurance requirements in the contracts are reviewed by the insurance broker, that you have active insurance certificates and bonds. Unlike general liability insurance, a bond will cover the warranty that's issued by the contractor under the project. So a bond will address defective work if it's done within the bond warranty period. Bonds are a premium and it often is overlooked by associations. But if you're doing these $3 million, $4 million, $5 million projects, they certainly should be considered, because you want to make sure that if there is a defect in the work, that warranty of the contractor will be in place and covered by the bond. Often, if you have a bond and a dispute arises, a contractor is more responsive because contractors have to personally guarantee the bond obligations. So it's a little bit extra of an enforcement for performance, which is really important.
I'm glad you mentioned about calling the insurance. I couldn't agree with you 100%. And because I've been in this industry over 25 years, I can tell you, I can share a quick story about a company that provided a COI. They're an air duct cleaning company. They provided a COI saying they could do the work, and they did the work. Um, there was a damage, and this was a tower. And it turned out that the insurance wasn't willing to cover it because their insurance restricted them to 3 floors. Of course, that's not on a COI. But had they called the insurance to confirm the information, they probably would have found out. So it's important to call the insurance and just, really know what you're getting, right?
Yeah, that's really important. I see some of the contractors these days are obtaining policies with condominium and high-rise exclusions when you know that this is the work that you're doing. That's why the contract needs to specifically state what type of insurance is required, and the insurance needs to be reviewed. Because if you have an insurance that has a high-rise exclusion, there's no coverage.
Correct. How much flexibility should construction contracts allow for unforeseen conditions versus maintaining a rigid scope?
So the contracts need to have strong change order provisions, and that is where your unforeseen conditions need to come in play. And that's why when we prepare our construction contracts, we have the plans that are attached to it. That reminds the contractor and says, no, this is included in your plans. Your plans are part of our contract documents. And in the event a change order is required, we need to confirm that it's not originally in the plans that were agreed to. So there is flexibility on unforeseen conditions, but I would recommend that your contract also provide a unit price for those unforeseen conditions. That allows you to cost control those future unanticipated changes that may not be included in the original construction plans. You can set it by linear foot, and you can have allowances for these so that at the beginning of the project, even though it may not be a known cost, you have set amounts that are anticipated in each of these line item costs.
Lindsay, I wanted you, if it's exactly what I say as well, when we talk about these thorough bid forms and controlling the cost, the worst thing you want to do. So it may be an unforeseen condition we may not encounter, and it's money you don't spend. But the worst position an association can be in is to need something and not have and now we're negotiating price in the middle of you doing your project and and when you're in need. So that's why those bid forms are so important. We may not encounter this type of repair, but it maybe the concrete is not a full depth repair, maybe it's a partial repair, but either way, you want to know what the costs are, and that greatly helps control the cost.
Yeah, and for any construction project, when management is going through your budget and preparing to disclose to the owners what the anticipated project costs are, you need to include contingencies. Oftentimes, we recommend a contingency from 10 to 20% of the contract, depending on what is going on. Because the contingency does not only cover your hard construction costs, but also legal fees, permitting fees, additional offsite parking that you're going to have to. You have to understand that this project is going to impact you beyond just the hard construction costs. And that's what those contingency numbers are for.
I would also, it is the engineering cost that includes, right? Right. There's more work. There may be more inspections.
Correct.
The pace, how quickly we are doing work requires more inspections by the engineer, right? So all of that is also cost that needs to be considered.
Yeah, the soft cost should be considered in the contingency too. And Lindsay say that it's good to have allowance, and that's important thing from the engineer point of view, because when we prepare the assessment, we always all the activity that we have some reasonable suspect that could appear during the execution, we put in the itemized bid sheet, and with an allowance, just with the purpose of obtaining the unit price from the contractor before the project is running, which is just the competition that they are on the bidding process, and they have to offer the best price for that item. It's not the case when the contract is just in progress, and the contractor should bring a new price. So it's different, the advantage from the association side in the beginning than in the middle of the project. So it's a disadvantage if the association have to negotiate in the middle of the project. It's better to negotiate at the beginning.
I also want to
Mhm.
highlight the importance when you're going through the bidding phase, right? Having that pre-bid meeting at the property with your engineer, and you're walking your general
The
contractors,
walkthrough is
scoping the job,
important.
the scope of work with the bid form and the plans in hand. Because again, none of us are perfect, and we all have years of experience doing what we're doing. And sometimes there's something we see that may not be or is unclear on
Mhm.
the bid form or in the plans. We want to make sure that they are corresponding with each other so things are not missed in the scope, right? And that everyone's taking the right things into consideration when providing you your bid numbers.
Well, that leads us into
Yeah.
construction management, right? How should boards plan the timing and sequencing of a construction project to minimize disruption? Alcuz,
Pardon, could you repeat it?
how should boards plan the timing and
Mhm.
sequencing of a construction project to minimize disruption?
Okay, well, the planning is an important consideration when we start the project. So it should depend on the dynamic of the building, because so the building has access means that could not be blocked, and some areas are used in determinate season of the year. So all those kind of things is the dynamic of the building has to be considered in the planning, and we should consider the season if it's a hurricane season like we are right now. So
Mhm.
we have to prevent that should be some delay for storm, or just for a hurricane warning. So I have been in projects that is a warning for a hurricane, and the hurricane never comes. So that could happen. Uh, when we have the quantity and we have the yield for every activity, that's important technical consideration, but the other consideration I mentioned, like weather and the building dynamic, to be incorporated in the schedule.
Yeah, I think it's important for boards to meet with the contractor and agree on a set timing for the project. I have some communities want their projects done in phases so that certain areas can be open and accessible to the owners. So it really just depends on the specific project and the desires of the community. But this goes back again to agreeing on a contract time, making sure that contract time is in your contract and you have enforcement rights. And also at the same time, you want to remind your owners and be transparent on the anticipated timing, the closures in accessible areas so that they can plan as well.
And your general contractors, again, should be well versed in doing construction in occupied spaces, right? That's a unique skill set all on its own, because it is disruptive. But again, with active communication, letting residents know when things are happening that are going to impact their units, so that they are prepared if we're doing work on the balcony, if they're working from home and there's going to be excessive noise because we're doing a week of demolition. All of that needs to be coordinated and well communicated throughout the community.
Yeah. So what kind of documentation should associations maintain during construction to protect themselves and ensure accountability?
Yes, of course. We recommend that communications to the contractor on performance always be placed in writing. You need to have that trail of documentation showing that you've given an opportunity to address the deficiencies that they've been highlighted, follow the contract notice requirements for specific warranty claims, and make sure that if you have a conversation that's important about a repair that's going to be made or changes to the contract schedule, those need to be documented in writing. I also think it's really important for management and the project manager to frequently follow up with the contractor on their construction schedule. As Audrey will tell you, they maintain weekly construction schedules that are modified. So they have these records. They're just sometimes not giving it to you unless you ask for it. So important to maintain those open lines of communications. And that's why it's important to have that designated person who's going to oversee the construction for your building, making sure that the communications are documented, making sure payments are processed. Under our construction contracts, no payment is made unless you have the appropriate lien releases, the warranties are provided, there are no claims for defective work. So there are conditions that need to be met under these construction contracts for payment to be issued. And it's important that that documentation is received prior to making payment.
Yeah, and Audrey, because Lindsay mentioned scheduling the construction meetings, who should attend these meetings, and should residents be provided information regarding the schedules, the access, the project impacts?
So depending where you're at in the life of your project cycle, I mean, oftentimes when you start off, you're having weekly meetings or at a minimum bi-weekly meetings with your project manager from your general contracting company, your manager, if you have a board member or a committee that's assigned to the project, and then your engineer or owner's rep, right? And so you're having these recurring meetings where your GC is providing an update, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, of where are we at on the phasing plan, right? On that schedule, the progress that we're making. Again, we talked earlier about change orders and quantities. So things do shift, right? Well, sometimes weekly on a schedule, but at the end of the day, all of that is reviewed and approved during your pay application, right? So that also has the schedule and days where things need to be adjusted. So, but your project manager for your general contractor should be giving you very thorough updates or like a 2-week look ahead of what activities you're about to embark on and how and what to communicate to your residents. It's really important. We personally, we share our weekly reports with our managers, and they can cut and paste whatever makes their life easier to the residents. Frequent town hall meetings if possible, or an update at board meetings. Let your residents ask us directly and address concerns for you is really important as well. But lots of communication, and you have to meet regularly for sure.
From the engineer side, it's important to keep on the the site, on the work site, the documentation regarding the permit and the inspection logs. That's to avoid some measure from the city to stop the project, and which is an inconvenience for the community. Inspection log and all the documentation regarding the permit.
Yeah, that's a great point as well, because believe it or not, just because you get a permit doesn't mean it's just open. You have to renew that permit depending what city you are operating in. Sometimes every 90 days, every 120 days, you have to renew the permit. And what does that look like? That means although your engineer is serving as your special inspector and performing these inspections and keeping the logs, the city's engineer will come and review that in order to grant you the extension of this permit, right? So that's typically, your GC is the one that's owning that responsibility, but that's very important as well as making sure that the inspections are up to date so your permit doesn't expire in the middle of your project.
Great. I know we're running out of time, and thank you for actually answering most of the questions that were coming in. So that was really helpful. But if you could give every association board one piece of advice before starting a major construction project, what would that be in 1 minute or less, Audrey?
Take a step back and look at the total picture, right? We hear deadline and compliance and we just rush to start hiring a team, and that's the wrong way to do it, right? And so just take a moment and really make sure, I can't stress enough the first phase of getting your team together and getting the documentation right.
Yeah,
Pardon?
1 minute or less, what advice would you give us?
So the last advice for all, before, if you have any issue, technical issue, restoration, upcoming leaks, water intrusion, whatever you have, your first call has to be to the engineer, for sure.
Thanks.
Yes, I agree with both Audrey and Alcluz, but it's just important to make sure that you have your professionals in line, that you're consulting with them, making sure that your scope is ready. And I agree with Audrey, while there are deadlines and compliance, it's really important to make sure that you have the right team in place, you have the right contracts in place, you have the plans, and you are ready to move forward. Because the worst thing that happens often is that these projects are done piecemeal, and what originally started as a small concrete restoration project in a corner of your pool deck just turns into the whole building through change orders. So you really want to get that planning phase is so important. You got to start planning and making sure you have a comprehensive project so that you can both be transparent with your owners and financially responsible.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for your time. I've displayed our information on the screen. So if you would like to reach out to any one of us, please feel free to do so. And we look forward to seeing you at other webinars hosted by Castle Group.
Yeah.
And this webinar will be posted on our website by tomorrow at www.castlegroup.com. Thank you again all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.